And Olivia, I just received the recorded notifications on, so thank you. Great. Well, everyone, thank you so much for being here today. I see the folks are still trickling in, but we'll want to get started now. Thank you so much for joining. My name is Zach Rabarchek. I'm joined today by my colleague, Sharon Brown. We are with Guidehouse, working and supporting the South Dakota Department of Education. We're really pleased to be working with you again this year as we enter the ESSER Year 3 reporting window. I'll hand it over to my colleague, and we will get started with the agenda and start walking through some of our slides. One thing I do want to flag for you is obviously this meeting is being recorded, so it will be provided to you through the Department of Education afterwards. We'll also have a PDF copy of the slides also available afterwards. To be determined exactly how those will be going out, but we'll make sure to get those in your hands and available. Throughout the meeting, if you have a question, please make sure to drop it in the chat, and we'll make sure to get those as we're going through in case you want to keep this a bit conversational and not save all of the questions towards the end as we're moving through. So I'll keep an eye on that as we're working. Really appreciate your time, and looking forward to going through this. And Sharon, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you so much, Zach, and good afternoon, everyone. Happy to dive in here. All right, so in reference to our agenda, so we're going to have a brief overview of ESSER 123 reporting timeline, ESSER Year 3 reporting process overview, diving into some resources and guidance, critical questions and issues. As Zach mentioned, if something does come up, please feel free to drop it in the chat. And we're going to have a data collection Excel workbook demo, and we'll also have time for questions and answers. So for this year, we do not have a survey. It's all in one Excel workbook that contains pre-populated data, and we're excited about that. So you should have received your workbook, Excel workbook, on March 13th, which was this past Monday. And do know that does close on April 7th. So that gives South Dakota Department of Education time to do any cleaning of the data during the month of April so that we can report and submit that information to the U.S. Department of Education on May 4th, 2023. All right, so diving into our reporting process, as we all know, you all have received that Excel workbook on March 13th. So that's our first step. And now now we're at the point where the local education agencies are going to populate that data collection workbook, leading us to step 3, having it submitted by Friday, April 7th, 2023. And then the South Dakota Department of Education is going to dive into a deep review, make sure we resolve any issues or any errors, leading to our last step in submitting that on May 4th. Do note that this one workbook has been provided to you all with verified pre-populated data from the state's grant management system and last year's ESSER annual report to reduce reporting burden for your school districts. So what should you have received at this point? You all should have received an email from the DOE's contracted Guidehouse members, which include a unique SharePoint link to your local education agency of Year 3 data collection Excel workbook. You should have also received a PDF copy of ESSER Year 3 reporting guidance. Your workbook should be entitled with your local education agency as with the final reporting template, as well as that Year 3 reporting guidance. So please make sure if you haven't received that, you check your spam mail so that we can make sure we get that over to you as soon as possible if you haven't. And that was sent to the superintendents and business managers. Perfect transition. If you haven't received either of those materials, please start by checking your spam box, junk box. More often than not, the emails have been filtered out due to it not coming from a local education agency system. And if you have not received it within those, please reach out to the South Dakota DOE support at guidehouse.com and let us know if you can't find the SharePoint link or if you're having difficulty accessing the folder or Excel workbook. We've had a couple people reach out and we've been able to solve those issues pretty fast. So please feel free to reach out if you have any questions or concerns in reference to that. Please note also that this workbook was shared with local education agency superintendents and business managers that have access to the SharePoint folder. If you need anyone else that needs to have access to the SharePoint folder within your local education agency, please feel free to let us know so that we can add that staff member to the SharePoint link so that they can have access. Important notes for using the Excel workbook. So the workbook has a workbook legend tab, which includes helpful instructions for navigating the file. The workbook utilizes color coding this year to help guide you in your local education agency through mandatory, conditional, and pre-populated and formula generated cells. And here's what it will look like. Your orange cells are pre-filled validated data from the state, which will be locked. The purple is conditional data to report with data checks. Green is formula data that's locked as well. And then blue are the mandatory data that you would have to report. If your local education agency expended all ESSER 1, SEA, reserve, and mandatory subgrant funds, your workbook will not include an ESSER 1 tab. Please alert South Dakota Department of Education when you have completed your ESSER Year 3 reporting by emailing the support email at guidehouse.com or by using the automated link that's attached to your workbook. So please note when using the Excel workbook, to reduce potential for errors and duplication of data or file versions, avoid downloading the Excel workbook to edit offline. Instead, make changes to the workbook within the workbook while it's connected to the SharePoint. The majority of cells in the Excel worksheet are locked except for the cells that are either mandatory to fill or dependent/conditional based on your local educational agency activities. So the mandatory responses, as we identified formally, which will be in blue, and conditional responses that apply to your local education agency, which are in purple. Please fill all expenditure questions within the associated section rather than leaving it blank. And then also we have prepared a link for you in reference to federal reporting resources. Within this link, you'll have access to frequently asked questions. You'll also have access to webinars, also including in the guidance and resources in reference to the Excel sheets that you'll be filling out. Also, there's a lot of annotated documents within that file as well that will help answer any questions that you may have. And if that does not help you, please feel free to make sure you reach out to the support line that we have attached. And also when the PowerPoint is shared out, you will have access to this link as well. And now I'm going to pass it over to Zach.
Thanks so much for walking through all that, Sharon. So there are a few other topics that we do want to note as you're moving forward through the Excel data collection workbook. One issue that we ran into last year that really caused a hitch in a number of people's data reporting processes was a question over the reporting period and the definition of expenditure. So just to note and reiterate, and this is also provided in the reporting guidance document, this ESSER Year 3 reporting period covers from July 1st, 2021 through June 30th, 2022. And for the purposes of this ESSER reporting, the definition of expenditure is an expenditure that has been reimbursed by the state within that period. So your LEA may have incurred an expenditure during the Year 2 process that was not reimbursed during that period by the state. If it was reimbursed during this Year 3 reporting period, that should be included in your ESSER Year 3 report. Expenditures that were not yet reimbursed by the state, maybe you made it towards the end of the school year, should not be reported during this Year 3 period. So, in some, look at the date when it was reimbursed by the state and if it was within this window. Terminology that we also know had caused a bit of confusion last year is a sort of a difference between how U.S. Department of Education deems its LEA mandatory subgrant and how it's referred to within the state. So you may be more familiar with the LEA formula allocation verbiage and the state level funds reallocation verbiage. And just know when you encounter those in the workbook or through the reporting guidance that they're talking about USED's LEA mandatory subgrant and the SEA reserve funds. And then if you do run into a question related to allocation amounts from the state, just reminding you that those documents are available on SD South Dakota Department of Education's federal funding portal at the URL listed below. A few other things to note, as Sharon had mentioned, Department of Education did provide pre-populated ESSER 1, ESSER 2, and ESSER 3 or ARP ESSER total expenditures from current and prior reporting periods, which also are used to calculate remaining funds for future reporting periods. As you're going through and documenting distinct expenditures, please make sure to take special care while filling out the total amount expended by activities section. We knew from last year that the buckets that U.S. Department of Education had set up do not align one-for-one with some of the GMS object codes. So please make sure to take special care as you work through those and divide up those expenditures into the activity buckets and subcategories. I also want to note, as you're working through, we did put in sort of a data check to make sure that your sub-activity expenditures add up to the total expenditures spent during the current reporting period. So as we walk through the workbook demo, you'll be able to see that in action, but it's just important to note as you're working through. Now, I do want to provide an opportunity as we are going through our reporting workbook. I'm sorry if everyone would bear with me for 1 second. I need to stop sharing my my screen. I apologize for this. I had updated a workbook yesterday and want to make sure that we aren't exposing any specific identifiable data of districts as we're going through. Olivia, would you mind holding off on recording for the next moment? My apologies for that, everyone. I just want to be careful. So as we mentioned, there is a workbook legend that is located within the first tab of the ESSER Year 3 workbook. This provides some general instructions and helpful tips as you're working through. Please note, as you saw in the previous slides, that there is a color coding legend that you can use to navigate and help navigate through the workbook. One thing I do want to note is that once your reporting is complete, we ask that you please reach out to our ESSER support@guidehouse.com email address, or using this link here, which will generate an automated message with your LEA's name to alert us that you've completed the workbook and we can start doing our data cleaning and validation processes. So we'll move down to the tabs that you'll see at the bottom of the workbook. Every district can expect to see the ESSER Cross-Act tab, which covers ESSER expenditures and data that covers ESSER 1, 2, and 3. As Sharon had mentioned earlier, if your LEA expended all of its SEA and mandatory subgrant ESSER 1 funds last year, you will not see an ESSER 1 tab, and you can move on to the ESSER 2 and ESSER 3 worksheets. If by chance your LEA does not have an ESSER 1 tab and you believe that you have remaining funds, please make sure to reach out to the ESSER support email address and we can make sure to get that rectified. So we'll take a moment here to work through some of the cross-act data. Most of this should look familiar from last year. We've pre-populated some of your FTE counts. And the first data that you're required to report is the FTE count as of September 30th, 2022. So please start there. You'll note here that these are blue, these cells are in blue for mandatory data to be shared. So please make sure to provide that here through the drop-down true or false selection. This section covers any activities under ESSER 1, 2, or ARP ESSER that were perhaps expended on the items below. Here we encounter our first, what we call data check, or conditional data in purple, light pink purple. If your LEA expended any funds, any ESSER funds on internet access. If you answer this true, then please make sure that you provide information and data responses for each of the following internet service provision questions. Please note, if you do answer true and have to fill out the conditional data, please make sure to fill out all of the conditional cells. If your LEA did not provide something, please count false as no. Unfortunately, that's the terminology used for reporting. It's a bit confusing. So please make sure to fill out all of the cells rather than just the one cell that might be true. We've also noted, and you'll see this repeated through a number of worksheets, that there's a number of opportunities to provide extended response. So in this case, if your LEA provided another type of internet service, you would answer true here. And then please provide up to a 1,500 character limit, more information on what type of internet service your LEA may have provided. Moving forward, we'll go through, not spend too long on each of these. These are repeated questions from last year. If your LEA did engage students with poor attendance or participation, you're then asked to fill out more true or false conditional questions based on how your LEA re-engaged those students, including an extended response for any other activities that don't fall within those buckets. And if your LEA allocated a portion of its ESSER funds to schools during this reporting period, we'd ask that you also fill out the following true and false conditional questions, while also making sure to fill out that description of other data used. So next, as I mentioned, we'll move into the ESSER 1 CARES response tab. Obviously, if your LEA does not have funds remaining, you will not see that. You'll note here we have some of the first pre-filled, pre-populated data from prior reporting periods, as well as data from your current reporting period. So you'll be able to track and see and measure against your own records what funds you may have expended during this reporting period. In this case, if this does not apply here, but if there are ESSER SEA reserve funds used, you're expected to share how those funds were used for those activities through true and false. In this, just to note, definitions of these activities are provided in the reporting guidance document that we've sent around. If you, as Sharon mentioned, if you don't have a copy of that, please make sure to reach out and we'll get that in your hands. We do also, and you'll see this repeated through ESSER 1 and ESSER 2, if you do have remaining funds, and this applies for both SEA reserve funds as well as LEA reserve funds, you're expected to provide the breakdown in terms of percentages of how those funds will be used moving forward. We put this data check in column N just so you can make sure as you're filling this out that your totals add up to 100. It's a simple step, but please, it does help us in the end make sure that we're accurately reporting your planned uses of those funds. Moving forward, you'll move into the mandatory subgrant amount that was expended in prior reporting periods and the current reporting period. And if you do have ESSER 1 expenditures during the current reporting period, you're expected to move into the activity detail. This is similar to what you saw last year, except it is laid out more clearly through this spreadsheet. You need to provide the breakdown across those addressing physical health and safety, immediate students, academic, social, and emotional needs, mental health supports, and operational continuity and other uses of each of the activities. So please provide those expenditures broken down across these subcategories, in which you'll see that they're all added up into this total amount. What is important to note during this is please go back to the check at the top of this section to make sure after you've recorded all of your expended activities that it aligns with the subgrant amount expended in the current reporting period. So make sure that columns V and W are equal. Moving forward, you'll also see that we move into any remaining funds. And as you saw previously, if there are remaining funds, you're expected to fill out the planned percentage of those uses. ESSER 2, you'll see the repeat of ESSER 1 as well. You'll be provided with the expenditures from the current and prior reporting periods. If there were uses during the current reporting period, you're expected to fill out the true and false. And if you did not have any of those expenditures, please, in this case, leave them blank or answer false for all of them. If you do have remaining SEA funds, you're expected to fill out those expected percentage breakdowns of those funds. And as you see, this is closely aligned and mirrors what was shared in ESSER 1. Where things change is when you get into ARP-ESSER, ESSER 3. As you know, the state did not opt for providing funds through SEA reserve. Those funds were provided directly to LEAs. So we've been able to pre-fill the data through many of the first columns for your LEA. Where we do move into some of the first populated data is in your total ARP-ESSER mandatory subgrant amounts awarded to your LEA, and moving forward with any amounts that were spent in prior reporting periods, which, as we know, there were no districts that did expend those funds last reporting period. You're then expected to provide a similar activity breakdown of those expenditures, except in this section, please note that these amounts are exclusive of the amount towards the 20% mandatory set aside to address learning loss. That will be addressed in a later section. So we work through that, and please make sure that all these activity expenditures add up to the sum of the total expenditures for the current reporting period. Then we'll move into the section, as we mentioned, you'll be expected to record similar expenditure data for current reporting period mandatory set aside learning loss activities. So very similar to what you've seen before, just noting that this is focused on the mandatory 20% set aside amounts. Then what we do want to flag is if you have remaining funds, you're expected to, as you saw in previous worksheets, provide the planned use percentage breakdown for your LEA. But then you're also expected, because of the requirements of ARP-ESSER reporting, to provide more detail into the activities or interventions that your LEA may have implemented to meet students' needs through learning loss activities. So what you'll see here is if you did expend any funds on learning loss during this reporting period, you'll be expected to provide the true-false breakdown of those data fields. Of note, of course, you'll see again that if another activity which is not included in one of these buckets is selected through true or false, please use this section to provide a description of those activities. We know it is a small cell, so please feel free to copy and paste into the cell as needed. And then at the end, you're also expected to provide a breakdown of how your LEA's selected activities or interventions responded to students' academic, social, and emotional needs. And this is mandatory if obviously your LEA provided any of the learning loss set aside activities. So I'm going to switch back over to my slides, and we do have time set aside for question and answer, so I'm happy to jump into that. One thing to note is if your LEA notices any data discrepancies in the pre-populated data that we provided, we first ask that you review your records to make sure that your expected expenditures were reimbursed by the state between July 1st, 2021 and June 30th, 2022. I know many of the districts last year that reached out with some of these questions were maybe looking at the wrong time period, or we're not looking at expenditures that have been reimbursed during this time period. So we'd ask that you please consider that. Also, if you have a question regarding some of the allocations that were made to your LEA, we'd ask that you also take a look at some of the documentation if needed on the Department of Education's portal. And obviously, and please, if strategies 1 and 2 don't address the discrepancy, please don't hesitate to reach out to us at SDDOES, that's our support, at guidehouse.com. As part of the data validation process, as we have mentioned, we'll be working with the Department of Education to review Excel workbook submissions on a regular basis, and we'll follow up with superintendents and business managers to address any issues. But please, if you're able to be proactive and flag these questions for us in advance, we'll be able to provide you with help in advance as well. Now, we do have some additional support and resources available for you coming up. So each Wednesday, we'll have office hours Zoom meetings. Last year, we used these as an opportunity to answer questions that may be shared across a number of different LEAs. It's a good time to discuss those in more detail. It's also a time to share practices with peers. We know we facilitated a few of those conversations, and we'll make sure to use that time as well to share sort of FAQ overviews of questions that we may be receiving during the week that we can answer and provide to everyone who attends. So those links should be shared soon with you as well. As we mentioned, we did share a PDF guidance document that includes, critical definitions shared from USED, as well as definitions that we've built out over the past reporting period, and does contain sort of a guided walkthrough of the data collection Excel workbook. And as I mentioned, we'll be sharing frequently asked questions during some of those office hours. So of course, moving forward, if there are any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to this email, and we will be happy to answer the questions that we're able to, or we'll also loop in members of the Department of Education as needed to make sure that we come up with the most accurate response. So I think for right now, I do want to open it up for any questions, open it up for any districts that may have had issues accessing their data. Please feel free to share in the chat, and we can answer those live. I'm not seeing any questions right now. I think I'd ask Cody, Jerica, Judy, or Angie, are there any questions that you'd like to flag, any advice that you've encountered? We have our first question. Is there a list of the questions from this workbook that can be provided so we can gather input from other staff in our district? Absolutely. Jason, I know some of the most straightforward ways to do this. We did share some of the federal resources, and I can share that with you directly afterwards via email. That does show sort of the full breakdown that walks through those step by step. You are also, of course, able to download the workbook if needed. We ask that you fill it in live on the SharePoint, but if needed to share a bit more easily across with staff in the district, you could also share that with them by downloading. Are there any other questions? Of course, as I mentioned, please don't hesitate to reach out to our support email, and we'll follow up with you as quickly as possible, and loop in staff members from the Department of Education as needed as well. Okay, if I'm not seeing anything else from folks, I really do appreciate the time you're able to provide to us today to work through this. Thank you so much. Looking forward to working with many of you again and providing support as needed throughout this reporting period. Remember, workbooks are due in April 7th. We do have the upcoming webinar office hours that you're able to attend. And again, please don't hesitate to reach out with any questions. So thank you so much.